we now move on to hear the oral evidence from Conservatives Abroad, Labour International CLP, Lib Dems Abroad, and Lib Dems in Europe. We have until 4:55 p.m. for this panel. And I think some of the panellists are online. Yes. Thank you. So I will ask Ms. Shorten and Mr. McAdam, who are online, if they can introduce themselves and confirm that they can hear and see us. So Ms. Shorten.
Good afternoon. My name is Jenny Shorten. I'm the chair of Liberal Democrats Abroad, living in France, and I used to be an election agent and campaign organiser for about 40 plus years in Wiltshire.
Excellent. Mr. McAdam.
Hi, I'm Tom McAdam. I'm a member of Liberal Democrats Abroad Steering Committee, and I live in Zurich in Switzerland.
Excellent. And for Ms. Shorten and Mr. McAdam, we have three witnesses in the room, so there's just always just a little bit of choreography when we're rotating between online and in situ witnesses. So if I could ask the witnesses here in the committee room to introduce themselves too, please.
Thank you. I'm Colin Blackwell, and I'm Deputy Chairman of Conservatives Abroad.
I'm Imogen Timon, and I'm the chair of Labour International Constituency Labour Party.
And my name is Richard Williams, and I'm Labour International's representative on Labour's National Policy Forum.
Thank you very much. Mr. Holmes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mundell, and welcome to all of witnesses virtually and in person this afternoon. The government have always been very clear and have said in the House in the past that any instance of eligible people being able to vote is unacceptable. Does the current system for overseas voting ensure that eligible voters are able to have their vote counted? And do you agree with my assertion, and maybe you don't, that's absolutely fine, many people don't, that actually the government has not concentrated on making it easier for overseas voters to vote in this legislation, and it's a missed opportunity? Could we start with you, Colin, and we'll go along the physical present people, and then I'll call on the virtual people when we're ready.
Right, thank you, Paul. And the simple answer, no, it does not. A survey of voter participation among overseas electors in the OECD has shown the UK with a significant statistical outlier, with the lowest effective participation rate, with only around 1.3% of the over 5 million potential electorate thought to have successfully cast a ballot at the last UK election. This bill, of course, doesn't overtly address overseas electors, but it does obviously have as one of its objectives to increase voter participation. Now, in line with the Electoral Commission's recommendation, Conservatives Abroad believes that technological advances now make it possible for a secure and verifiable online facility to be introduced to allow overseas electors to download and self-print their ballot paper and return envelope for one-way return posting. Now, New Zealand and Singapore are two English-speaking Westminster democracies which have implemented downloadable ballot papers, and they use a biometric identification app to verify an overseas elector accessing a ballot paper for downloading against the voter registration ID credentials which were provided at the time of voter registration. Now, unlike at the time of the Elections Act in 2022, when Conservatives Abroad first recommended this approach. The UK now has this technology, as in the last few weeks, the development and launch of the One Login app by Government Development Services for gov.uk services is now available. So this is something which previously was not within technological possibility, but now it absolutely is. And New Zealand and Singapore, I think, are the gold standards for downloadable ballots for their diaspora.
Thank you. You anticipated my second question to you, Colin, so you've killed two birds with one stone. If we can go to Imogen and Richard on the general point about the legislation, and then maybe ask whether, well, no, I will ask whether you agree that with a proposal to allow downloadable ballot papers and whether that makes the system easier. Imogen.
Yep, sure. I mean, in the proposal itself, there are some elements that will help overseas voters get on the register and exercise their vote that go further than the situation already, like an extension to the postal vote, to require registration earlier, and also things like the automatic registration, looking at passports, some of the pilot projects as well. However, I think still more can be done. We find with postal votes particularly, which is often what people go to because there's not really enough information about proxy voting for many people, or a knowledge in electoral registration officers about how this can operate, that it feels like a barrier. So if we take postal voting as an example, if it's sent out earlier, yes, there's like a 70% return rate or so, but the postal ballots that were sent out later, around the 27th of June for the last election, only 2% were returned. If you look at specific countries, there was only a 6% return rate for Australia. There was a high return rate for France, that was 75%, but still, you know, comparatively Spain, which is also a European country, only 32% were returned. And Royal Mail itself has said, you know, it takes 6 to 7 days for standard letters to reach the rest of the world. So if the postal vote deadline is 14 days, then I don't know how we're expecting for it to reach voters and get it returned in time. So yeah, for us, I think the question of downloadable ballots is one option, as well as looking at the potential of online voting, and also the use of embassies and consulates to either be a voting hub or a place where we can return ballots to, so they could potentially go by diplomatic mail back, which is much quicker.
It's fair to say, just very quickly, this is not a challenge, it's just an observation to your answer, and thank you for that. The British Overseas Voters Forum, you've outlined some possible solutions. The British Overseas Voters Forum proposed some solutions such as you've outlined, postal ballot papers to be downloaded and securely posted via embassies and consulates, as well as, and that's used in the Netherlands, but they didn't recommend electronic voting, which would be insecure. Is that your understanding of their response to those suggestions, to those possible?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I was just checking. I wasn't trying to get.
Okay.
Richard.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, perhaps just to connect onto that last point while it's top of mind, I think it was also something that came up in discussions amongst members of Labour International in terms of what could be viable alternatives to the current system. When speaking about electronic voting, we noticed inside the party, we're of course not the first country to talk about this, there are other European nations that have successfully introduced electronic voting, Estonia being probably the best example of that, where in the last election over 51% of votes were cast via an electronic system, and there are a number of measures built into that system to avoid things like voting coercion, whereby multiple votes can be cast and only then the very last one is actually counted. And physical voting always takes precedence in the case that electronic votes and physical votes both are received. Having said that, I think just to come back to the original point as well on whether citizens abroad and Britons abroad are adequately addressed as a voter group, I think the numbers that Colin rightly spoke about are very telling. Of the 5 million Britons living abroad, only just under 200,000 of them are on the electoral register, which I think speaks for itself. And I think really there's three main reasons for that. One of those is beyond looking at processes, it's simply awareness. Many Britons aren't aware that they have the right to vote if they're not living in the country. There is no proactive communication on the side of the government. It's very much left on the individual themselves to find out what their rights are, and then of course to go through the process of contacting their local authority for where they used to live in the UK, which I did in Ashford, as Mr. Joseph maybe knows, his constituency, which is relatively easy, but there then is also the additional process of having to register for a postal vote, which happens afterwards. These are all things that are addressed in the bill, and I think there are some improvements there. But the awareness is the first hurdle. Then there are the processes themselves, and then the third point is, in some cases, probably apathy. The idea if you don't have an MP representing your interests as somebody living abroad, you're not maybe going to care about the potholes in the local high street as much.
I also think that you issue a fair challenge, before I come to the other witnesses, where apathy and not understanding the process for voters is an issue, but also us in this House have very rarely do we have overseas voters or constituents of ours get in touch with us. I had one actually 2 months ago. Maybe I'm lucky. But 2 months ago I had one, and my team, who are very good, didn't quite understand what they were and were not allowed to do because they weren't physically in the constituency. So I think this House has a duty to try and improve knowledge about MPs actually representing those people as well. And I learnt a solid lesson. Jenny and Tom, shall we come to you on the first question, please?
Can I go first?
And Jenny, yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Can I say that we don't disagree with any of what has been said, but pick up on a couple of points that particularly have come to the surface. One, if I may, the last point you made about contact with MPs, I've conducted a survey across all parties, to look into exactly that. And the answer to the question, do overseas voters think they are represented, is no, because things like the automated replies say, I can only help you if you live in the constituency. And it is
really good point.
No wonder they feel invisible. And I think that's a word that has regularly cropped up in our surveys with people who get in touch with us. I feel like I'm not there, just not in any notice of. The other thing that I wanted to particularly just direct our thinking towards is the question of whether or not the processes and systems set us up to fail or set us up to for success. And I would say, as a former election agent, the election timetable is not fit for purpose. It doesn't make sense, and it went wrong for UK electors this last time round as well, but particularly for overseas, as I think it was Imogen who remarked, you can't get it done. And to have a situation whereby with the current options, you have to wait until 19 days before the polling day to know who the candidates are. So that's the earliest you can prepare ballot papers. And then people can still register up to 11 working days before. It's not going to work, however hard and however assiduously these people who administer it actually try. And the figures, and I would like to say thank you on behalf of, I think, all of us, to the Electoral Commission for finally collating the actual how many postal votes got back in time figures. It's the first time we've seen them. And I'm sure everybody in this room is shocked by the fact that it's under a half. So process, yes, but also a matter of culture, and a significant matter of culture, I think.
Thank you. Tom, don't feel like you have to answer if you don't want to. I want your own parties to be able to scrutinise you and ask you questions as well. So if you do want to, please do, but I want to allow your colleagues to ask you questions as well.
I think I would just like to touch on the opportunity here. When we look at France, at their last legislative elections, they had 37% turnout of overseas citizens. We compare that to the turnout of British citizens overseas at the last general election, which was 5%. We have a huge opportunity there. And it's not one measure that will help there, it's the package of measures. The apathy point, I think, is really important. Without a dedicated overseas member of parliament talking about the interests of overseas citizens, it's very easy to feel that we don't have representation in Parliament, and with the problems in actually voting, people, I think, do not feel incentivized to attempt to vote. So, I don't think any one measure is really going to move the needle, but if we take everything as a whole, then we might be able to move towards the numbers that they see in France.
Thank you. If the Minister decides to make me the MP for overseas voters, I'm more than happy to do surgeries across the world. Thank you very much, Mr.
Out of
Mandel.
Mongolia, Paul.
Minister.
Thank you very much. And just as an aside to Paul's point, I do receive correspondence from constituents who live overseas, usually in respect of their pension arrangements. However, to tackle the point about apathy or disengagement, the bill does include taking the powers to pilot automatic voter registration. And do you think that would be a valuable tool to have for overseas voters?
Right. So I think has been touched on by others here. Awareness is everything. And Conservatives Abroad believes that what is vital above all else is raising awareness of the right to vote and to encourage overseas citizens to register to vote, which of course is done online now. Now, historically, the civil service have always sort of said, oh, we can't contact Brits overseas because we don't keep a register. We don't know where they live. We don't know who they are. And that in itself raises a question. Well, how would this part of the electorate be suitable for automatic registration? But what we do have today is government services, in a way that not done before, delivered digitally and electronically. And many government departments now digitally interact with millions of British citizens living overseas. The most obvious one, of course, is the Passport Office. 500,000 passports from overseas every year are renewed. So that's over 10 years, that's 5 million. The International Pensions Office, DWP, that deals with more than 1 million overseas pensions. The FCDO will keep registers individually in individual countries of local Brits. And lastly, HMRC. First place people go when they move overseas is to change their address with HMRC. Millions of British people living overseas still pay British taxes in one form or another, or make NI contributions voluntarily. So what I'm saying is that if you put all these digital interactions of government with overseas Brits together, and you make it in such a way that a link is automatically provided on interaction to the online voter registration page, then overnight you're reaching potentially millions of this invisible electorate with the exact place they need to go to register to vote. So that's the approach that Conservatives Abroad would suggest you look at.
And on our side, I think, the automatic voter registration pilots are a great thing to look into, especially for overseas voters. And I agree with my colleague, actually, that looking at when we register for a passport and how we can then register to vote. It may miss some Brits, yes, but unfortunately we do not keep a record of the emigration, so it's the best opportunity we have. However, I think it needs to come with a package of other measures, because otherwise it's not going to necessarily affect turnout. I think we see in countries where it's passive registration in particular, there is a lower turnout, so it needs to be accompanied by measures that can help people contact, even if it's the Electoral Commission, contact voters abroad to inform them, whether that's like a one free post or something like this, or an opt-in at registration, any other form. I think these options need to be explored, and I think also the timeline for renewal also needs to be explored alongside this to make sure we stay on the register as well.
Yeah, I would agree with all of the points just mentioned, I think. There is one group of people who still, I think, may even fall through the cracks if you're just looking at the HMRC records, and perhaps people who have emigrated, which of course are people who are born to British parents overseas, who may have a right to citizenship but have never lived in the country. They have specific difficulties even getting onto the electoral register, where they need to provide evidence of their parents' birth certificate in many cases, and their own birth certificate, and then where their vote should be assigned. So this was a topic that came up in discussions with other Labour International members. Beyond that, I think if we speak about the choice architecture, I think we certainly would echo the sentiment that we're definitely very much in favour of the trialling of automatic and automated voter registration. One topic and one perhaps way to look at doing this that came up in discussion with our members was the idea of automatic reminders upon passport renewal, which is an interaction which many Brits abroad will have. And if you then structure this in such a way that they then have the choice, a tick of the box to say, yes, I want to be on the register or not, this would simplify and consolidate the process for many people. There is then the question of whether it's an opt-in or opt-out approach. I think even in the notes accompanying this bill from the House of Commons Library, there was reference to the Sheffield University case study, where 75% of students were enrolled on the electoral register through a process whereby they were prompted upon their annual enrolment for university, and this compared to 13% for other universities. I think if this system was explored in potentially a pilot for voters abroad, we could maybe expect to see similar results just by structuring the choice in such a way that people have this prompt and then asking whether it should be an opt-in or an opt-out choice.
We'll come to you, Ms. Shorten, online.
Can I cede the floor to Tom?
Yes, no problem.
Thank you, Jenny. So on AVR, we're in favour of that. There was a YouGov poll at the last election that showed that only 26% of Brits abroad understood their rights. So automatic registration, using the touch points that were previously mentioned, is something we would support. And to Imogen's point about the free post, voters abroad should be making informed decisions and receive literature from candidates in the same way as voters domestically. So we would support anything that enables, say, one free post or an electronic communication from candidates to citizens abroad, so they're actually able to make that informed decision.
Can I just add one other thing to that last point about the free post, which is, if you look at the Select Committee report, they suggested, of the review of the general election, they suggested a good first step would be to centralise the records of overseas electors and have them all on one register. And that would be somewhere where you could start then to have effectively the target group in one place. And informally, we've chatted with, I've chatted with electoral registration officers in the run-up to the last elections bill, and they were saying, well, we deal with pretty much everybody, not entirely everybody, but most people overseas by email. So our records hold that data. So you put together a centralised register, plus the fact that the councils already know where to find these people, and you have the means by which to inform them. And it must be right that you can have the basic data flowing about who are the candidates. It's not about their vote, that's then their choice, and we'll discuss digital in a moment, I'm sure. But it's about what is their choice. And in this day and age, I don't think there's any excuse why I'm expected to vote for people I've never even heard of and haven't approached me.
Joy Franklin.
Thank you, Chair. So I wanted to talk a little bit about automatic and automated registration, and I wondered, for all of the panel, do you think that British citizens living overseas should be actively promoted to join the register? You've already, a couple of members of the panel have already touched upon it. And then, of course, a second part of the same question, particularly, and Colin Blackwell, you already mentioned this, in relation to the Passport Office. There is a mechanism, obviously, with overseas UK nationals. They, when they renew or they apply for a passport, could it be a sensible approach to actually provide those overseas individuals with information about registering to vote?
Yes, in one word, and that is really precisely what I was trying to say in my previous answer. That I've renewed a passport from overseas, and I've provided a local mobile phone number and an email, and there's a healthy two-way interaction which goes. They tell me as my passport's been printed, it's on its way, etc. So there are plenty of opportunities in that interaction which is going on with the overseas citizen to say, by the way, they're already sending me something to say, do I want to donate my organs? So why can't they also then send something which says, do you want to be on the electoral register? And this is the link to do it. So absolutely, and I think other government departments can follow that. I'm saying it's ultimately it's somebody's choice whether they want to register or not, but they should have the facts, they should have the link, and they should have the knowledge that they have the right to vote.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add anything?
I would just agree as well. I think being prompted is very important generally, because I think, even conversations with us, I mean, everyone here is giving oral evidence as a member of a political party. We were aware of our right to vote that came back, but speaking to our communities of Brits abroad, not everyone was. When we reached out to friends and family, some people were not aware that they had regained the right to vote. And renewing the passport is a kind of a very basic starting point, actually. And I would not say it's the end goal, but I would say it would be the starting point of getting people back on the electoral register and being able to exercise, the democratic right in this country that they were given. So.
Yeah, no, I think I would echo all of that again. The only thing I would say is, why not take it a step further and design it so it's an automatic opt-in? I think there's already been studies done around this on the topic of organ donation, whereby you get a much higher acceptance rate if you have the default set to opt-in and then manually ask people if they don't want to let their organs be donated. Why not do the same thing for being on the electoral register? Assume people do want to, unless they don't. And of course, you can then differentiate between the limited and open register or the full register. But I think at least for the limited one, that stays confidential. I mean, it's something that could be looked at potentially, making that even easier.
Chair, can I just echo the point just made, that we would absolutely, if it is right that British citizens living with eligible voters in the UK automatically go on the register, why is it not right for the British citizens who are eligible overseas to be treated in the same way? I think it's a very straightforward answer. It may have to be done by a different method, but the principle should be exactly the same.
Mr. Joseph, we have 1 minute for your question and hope for the answer.
Thank you, Chair. I know you touched on about that MP is not able to help you or locate you because some of the digital system we use, caseworker, is linked to the voter register.
Yeah.
So this is why maybe we can't help. But do you think that there should be a separate register for those living in overseas? Will resolve those issues?
Well, look, each constituency has a separate overseas register, and we political parties get this. So, we get all the overseas register data. I'm not exactly sure what benefit a central register brings, other than maybe convenience. But I do think it's potentially a slippery slope for then saying, oh, well, let's have overseas constituencies just for overseas Brits, which we don't think is a good idea. We think it's counterintuitive and has the potential to severely reduce overseas electors' representation and not to enhance it. So, the Conservative Party at the last election, in our manifesto, we saw the solution as actually being one of appointing a minister for Brits abroad and actually having a representative basically battling for Brits abroad within government and effectively with civil service support, therefore answering the questions that MPs get from their overseas electors. So I don't necessarily see the benefit of unifying the existing separate overseas registers into a single one.
You've achieved the last word of this panel, Mr. Blackwell. So on behalf of the committee, can I thank our witnesses here in the Boothroyd room and online for their evidence. And we will now hear oral evidence from Demos and Full Fact. And we have until 5:20 and our revised time scale for this panel. So could I ask our witnesses to just please briefly introduce themselves for the record?
Hi, my name is Azora Moores and I am the Associate Director of Information Ecosystems at Demos, the UK's cross-party think tank.
Hello, I'm Chris Morris. I'm Chief Executive of Full Fact. We are a charity and we do fact-checking. We also have a technology team and a policy team to try to tackle issues of misinformation.
Yep. Mr. Holmes.
Mr. Mandel, thank you very much. Good afternoon, both of you, and welcome to the committee. I really did enjoy reading both of your submissions